Okay, it's time to make gluten-free bread. A lot of y'all have told me that you really wanted me to do a video on that, and I planned to all along. It's just too many irons in the fire. But it's time to make bread, and I've decided to go ahead and make the gluten-free. If you didn't see the video comparing the Champion grain grinder to the Vitamix as grinding grain, you should watch that. I'll put a link up here so you can see that. I was pretty impressed with the way that the Vitamix handled itself, although I have to say the Champion won, at least in the grain grinding. That's specifically what it's for, and it does a good job. But I could make do with the Vitamix as a grain grinder, at least for millet, I'm sure. It worked very well. So why do we make gluten-free bread? Well, it seems like everybody these days has gluten insensitivity or intolerance and gut problems and just a plethora of issues that seem to stem from gluten. And honestly, I really don't think that it's, in the bottom line, just the gluten as much as it is the toxins, the chemicals that are being sprayed on the crops. My husband is from North Dakota, and his uncle is a farmer up there, and about 2 weeks before they harvest wheat, they spray the entire field down with Roundup, which is glyphosate. And the reason for that is so that everything ripens at the same time, or dries down at least. I don't know about ripen, but it dries down at the same time so they can harvest the entire field at the same time and not have grains that are too wet and unripe. So, you know, when you eat wheat that's not organic, particularly, you're just eating chemicals. And so I think that the huge rise in gut problems that we see today is more a result of pesticides than gluten itself. However, that said, I do know that for some people, eliminating grains altogether, or at least gluten grains, can allow the gut time to heal. So we do recommend strictly organic grains. Okay, what I'm going to make today is, the recipe actually calls for just millet, but I like to mix things up. So I mixed 50-50 millet and sorghum flour, and yes, I ground the sorghum grain as well. Have you ever seen sorghum grain? Let me show you, hang on. Sorghum is a very interesting grain, and forgive me for leaving the camera frame, but I didn't think about doing this until just now. But anyway, it looks like, I don't know, little bitty BBs. But anyway, it's, can you see it? It's the BBs of the sorghum are a little bit larger than millet, and so anyway, it's a good gluten-free alternative. So yeah, I grind that and the millet. Now I'm going to give you the recipe for one loaf of this, but I'm going to double it today because I don't like to have to make bread every time I turn around. So anyway, let's change the angle of the camera and we'll get set up. There are a lot of ingredients to this, but it's really easy. It's not a hard thing to make. You could actually call this get moving bread because there's so much fiber in it. You'll see. So let's change the camera angle. We'll set up over there where I've got everything set up, and I'll show you how to make this stuff. Okay, so here's all my ingredients. I've got everything measured out and ready to go. Pretty much you just dump everything in the bowl, and then you leave it sit for about 10 or 15 minutes so that the liquid, the water can absorb like the chia seed and flax and stuff like that, and it can kind of bind together a little bit better. So here's what it is. This is a 50-50 mix again of sorghum and millet flour. So I'm going to put this in. My sorghum. This is 2 cups of tapioca flour. And again, this is a double recipe, so when I give you the recipe at the end, I'm just going to give you a single loaf recipe. You need to try it before you start making large amounts of it. This is my sweetener, and I have chosen for this recipe to use sucanate. So that's short for sugarcane natural. Okay, it calls for 1 cup of ground flaxseed. So you can see you're getting a lot of omega-3s. I think one recipe calls for 5 tablespoons of psyllium seed husk. And so this is double. It's my psyllium. You can see why I call it get moving bread. This is ground chia seeds, and it calls for 1/4 cup per recipe, so this is a 1/2 cup of chia. And of course my yeast, 2 tablespoons thereabouts, and 2 teaspoons of salt for a double recipe. So those are my dry ingredients. So you mix all of the dry ingredients together first, and then we're going to add the liquids. Now, it calls for 2 cups of water per recipe, and then oil, and you're supposed to mix the water and oil together and then dump it in. What I've chosen to use instead of water is I have some soy milk that I want to get rid of. So I'm using soy milk instead of water. You can kind of mix it up a little bit. So you just mix all the dry ingredients together well. Make sure that all the tapioca powder is disappeared and stuff. By the way, I see this here on the counter. Do you know what that is? Sure you don't. Of course not. I dug that up here a while back. That's mayapple root. And if you ever have a problem with constipation, not only would this bread help, but if you take just, let's see if I can get it to show up on the camera. Let me not do that ever. Can you see that little tiny root? Yeah, that's dried. If you chewed up about maybe a 1/2 inch of that root, I guarantee you would go the next day. Don't use that stuff unless you know what you're doing. Mayapple. It's also called mandrake. I dug that up not too far from here. Okay, get everything mixed up together. And then we're going to add the liquid. It calls for 2 cups of liquid and 1/4 cup of oil per recipe, and you want your water to be warm, not hot but warm. Okay, I've measured everything out so it's precise. Okay, mix all this together. Once we get it all mixed together, then as I said, we're going to let it sit for a while. It's going to be kind of soupy right now, but you'll see when we come back here in just a little bit, it won't be soupy anymore. All that chia and flax and psyllium are going to absorb the liquid, and we'll be able to knead this. And really the only reason that you need this is pretty much just to shape it, because you're not trying to develop gluten, which is why you need gluten breads, is to develop that gluten content in it. Okay, so we'll mix it well. We'll come back in just a few minutes and you'll see what I mean. It's going to be more workable. And by the way, always remember, whenever you're grinding fresh grains, I ground up more than I needed. And I'm going to store whatever's left in the freezer and use it as soon as I can. But anyway, you're going to need that a little bit extra probably for kneading, just in case. Okay, be right back. Okay, here we go. We're going to knead this out a little bit, like I said, more than anything, just to shape it. By the way, I neglected to mention the reason that I grind my own grains. I did mention this in the video that I did on homemade spelt bread, is because within just hours of the time you open that little kernel of grain, the nutrition in it goes down. The fats oxidize, and so it's really not best for you to eat grains that flours that you buy off the grocery store shelf. Another thing, if you do buy millet flour, especially if it ages a little bit, it tends to be bitter, so beware. It is best with the millet to use freshly ground millet flour. So this behaves very differently than regular bread dough, obviously, because it doesn't have the gluten to kind of hold it together. That's why you put all the chia and the flax and all that stuff to kind of give it, more holding power. So it's a little bit wet yet, so I'm going to have to add a little bit more flour to it to get it to be workable. So, and you have to knead it a little different. You kind of keep your hands more flat than you do with regular flour, regular dough, bread dough. Okay, let's get a little serious about adding more flour here. Whenever I first started grinding my own grains, I did not realize that the moisture content in those freshly ground flours is actually higher than the store-bought stuff, and so you kind of have to adjust your liquids, and I forgot to do that in this recipe, so it's a little bit moist, so we'll have to probably add a little bit more flour to knead in. Now I'm going to go ahead and split this dough so that I can knead each half individually and control it a little bit better. And I'm going to set that one over there. We'll knead him in just a minute. And again, this does not behave like regular bread dough, but it's really not hard to do. It's pretty easy. And again, the only reason that you're really kneading this now is to shape it and to get it to just the right moisture content and consistency and stuff. Like you could see, this one had a little bit too much moisture in it, so we're having to add a little bit of flour here. So anyway, that's something always to remember if you begin to grind your own grains, is that always use less liquid than the recipe calls for to begin with. You can always add more, but it's a little bit harder to deal with if you have to take it out. Now, also with this bread, we're going to knead it out, shape it, and put it in the pan. You can just shape this into a peasant loaf and put it on a cookie sheet and bake it, but I'm going to go ahead and put it in my bread pans just to see what it does. Anyway, what was I saying? Oh yeah, you don't bake this at 350 like most breads. You bake this at 390. We're going to let it sit for about 15 or 20 minutes to kind of raise a little bit, and then we'll put it in the oven on 390. Just kind of shape it into a nice loaf. And these, of course, are pre-oiled, and then you just plop her in, kind of press it down a little bit. Round two with this guy. You can see you can't be quite as rough with it as gluten dough. Gluten dough has that spongy texture. This is kind of more of a crumbly texture, really, but it's not too bad. So we'll get a little more flour kneaded in. I'm going to do a video soon. If you guys could see what I have on my feet, you'd probably really laugh. But I'll show you. I'll do a video, show you my favorite pair of shoes. I think you might be surprised. We'll do that maybe next week or something. Alright, I need a little more flour. It feels a little moist still in my hands. You'll get the feel of it. You'll kind of have to play with this a little bit, but this will give you an idea at least of what it's like. It's really not hard. When I first started making bread, I was petrified, and when I first started, it was just this big mystery with gluten-free bread, and I just thought, oh, that's going to be tough, it's whatever. It's not that bad. It's just a little different, Okay, shape her down. I'll tell you, if you want to see the queen of gluten-free, go to Christina's Kitchen, and I don't know if it's .com or .org. She's in Whitley City, Kentucky. That gal can cook, and she is the gluten-free queen. And so that's where you want to go if you want more gluten-free recipes. She's got some on her website. Maybe I'll put a link to that, or at least the address, in the comment section or the description below the video. Okay, 2 down. Now, I'm going to let these sit for about 15 or 20 minutes and raise, and then we'll put them in the oven on 390. You leave them in for about 40-45 minutes and see what happens. They're raising up nicely. Okay, in they go. 45 minutes, 390. Okay, so here we go. Loaf number 1. Nice. Here's our second loaf. There it is, and those turned out nice. We'll let those cool. Slice them up. Remember that it's not best to eat bread fresh out of the oven because the yeast really needs to have time to die so that it won't irritate the stomach. The only way that I know of around that is to slice the bread up, lay it directly on the oven rack and set the oven at the lowest temperature and dehydrate the bread, which is called zwieback. Very, very good for you. Very easy to digest. And there it is, gluten-free bread. And we'll see you on the next video. Thank you for thumbs up.